A lot of us that do development or work with software but don't do DevOps every day have some problems sometimes understanding what DevOps is. And in fact, probably a lot of people that work with DevOps every day sometimes have problems defining what DevOps is. Fundamentally, at least to me, DevOps is the culture around building practices and processes that let you work uh, on improving the entire process of delivering software from the beginning to the end and making sure that you have confidence and increasing confidence that you are building viable software for production, right? That what you're building is better quality, you're moving faster, you're optimizing the whole process as you go through, and you're just getting better and better at it and learning as you go, as you find more information out. Um, a lot of people wonder how that's different than DevSecOps, right? Or sometimes they even call it SecDevOps, with the idea that security is part of it. And the true answer is it's not, right? DevOps has to include some security, even if it's the thought that, hey, we don't need to worry enough about it right now. We're just going to do a little bit of security, just the minimum, maybe even less than what other people would consider the minimum. But it's just security is part of it. It has to be in order to understand that you're building quality software. That's got to be part of it. And just like performance has to be part of it, right? Or user experience has to be part of whatever you're building, right? You're always going to have to consider them. A lot of people drop security or put security in as an afterthought, and so DevSecOps came a term to remind people that we're focusing on it as a first-class citizen right from the beginning of the project. But the reality is you're going to execute the same way whether you're doing DevOps or DevSecOps. They can't be different. One great way of describing kind of what composes DevOps comes from the book, The Phoenix Project, which is a great novel. Talks about a team getting better and better at doing their job in operations and expanding it till they're doing what we would consider DevOps. One of the things I love about the book is that they don't actually ever talk about DevOps. It's never a goal to get to DevOps. They're just trying to do their jobs better so that they can have breathing room and they're not overwhelmed with the tasks they've been given. And one of the ways they come up with describing the idea of DevOps is what they call the three ways. And those three ways are, first, systems thinking, thinking of everything from dev to ops as one system, and you can't optimize one piece of it at the expense of another, right? The reason DevOps became the term is because those are kind of the bookends, right? You start with development, you end in operations when you're doing the delivery, but it's really everything in between it, right? Everything that goes into making sure you have the right quality, the right capabilities, the right requirements have all been boiled into it, right? So it's thinking about the whole project as a whole, business, everything in it. The second way, amplifying feedback loops. One of the things we constantly want to do in DevOps is to get feedback and act upon that feedback. So that as we do, let's say, one loop through where we're building something we deploy to ops, right? We deploy to production, we hand it off to the customer, whatever the case is. We want to go back then, and the next time we go through and implement the next feature, we want to do it better. We want to take what we learned from that loop and work it back into our system so we get better every time. We're constantly improving the entire system, right? Because we still have to pay attention in the first way, which is systems thinking. And then the third way is a culture of continual experimentation and learning, right? If you're not working in the learning culture, then you're going to fail. You have to constantly be learning. And part of that is learning what you're doing in your process, learning more techniques, learning what the new tools are out there, but constantly looking at everything we do as an experiment. Some of the experiments are going to work, some of them aren't. Some things are going to make our lives easier, some of them are going to make it harder. And adjusting and saying, hey, we liked this piece of what we did, but we didn't like this piece, right? We want to change it so it has this outcome. So here's how we're going to try doing it next time, right? And constantly working that into each loop, each round through, each iteration, each new feature, each story you're working on, whatever the case is, and building that in so that that is part of the culture you're working with. You're constantly learning. Another question that comes up often when it comes to DevOps is, what are ways to measure success in DevOps? And the best kind of the industry standard that's come out of here is the four key metrics. It comes from a report called the DORA report, Accelerate the State of DevOps report from the DevOps Research Association. And what they do is they've broken it down into two different types of metrics. There's 4 metrics. They break them down into 2 throughput metrics. How fast are we producing software? And stability metrics. How good is that software? How stable is it? And each of them obviously have two metrics, right? So for throughput, there's lead time and deployment frequency. How quickly do we go from the idea of, I want to build this, to it's in the hands of customers? That's lead time. And how often do we deploy, right? What's the frequency? If we have a lead time of 2 weeks, but we only deploy every 6 months, those things really aren't getting into people's hands, right? We want to do something that's rapidly enough that we're constantly seeing improvements. We're constantly deploying. We're constantly exercising our deployment capabilities, but we're also building something each time. And since most things happen in parallel, it's not like the team is generally working on only one feature at once. You'll have different parts of the teams doing different things. So these two combine to say, what's your real throughput? How often are people going to see new stuff? A lot of times people used to think of the iron triangle, cost, speed, and quality, pick any two. The reality is that what they found through the DORA report and elsewhere in the industry is that the faster you move, if you do it the right way, if you use DevOps principles and do the right things, then as your throughput goes up, your stability goes up because you're making small changes at any given time. So you're taking little bits of risk. Everything's a small step. And so they find that they go hand in hand. And the two metrics that they look to track stability are change failure rate and time to restore service. How often do things break? And how long does it take you to get back to working when things do break? And that's breaking on deployments, right? And there's lots of different ways to look at it. The DORA report shows you a lot of different options, but the reality is anything that is a failure when you go to deploy, whether it's a broken requirement that was missed, it makes a feature unusable, whether it's a deploy that actually fails, or whether it's just a system goes down, how long does it take you to get back to working? And it's actually, like I said, easy to get to the point where throughput and stability are both very, very high, and not have to try to sacrifice one for the other, which pays into the idea of systems thinking like we talked about as DevOps. So I hope this helps.